My dear wife, you know I can't father a child. Please sleep with Eric so we can have a child.
I love you, Dan, and I'll do anything for us.
This woman cheated on me, slept with another man, and got pregnant for him. This child is not my child, and I am not her father.
The day Daniel told me the truth, we were sitting on the balcony of his family house in Lagos, watching the sun bleed orange across the Third Mainland Bridge. Our wedding was 6 weeks away. The invitations had already gone out. My dress was hanging in my mother's wardrobe, pressed and perfect, waiting for the most important day of my life. He held my hand. His palm was sweating. I remember thinking it was nerves, the good kind, the kind that comes before forever. Then he opened his mouth. Clara, there is something I should have told you a long time ago. I turned to look at him. His eyes weren't meeting mine. That should have been my first warning. I went to the hospital 6 months ago, he said slowly. I have been going for a while, actually. The doctors, they confirmed something. My heart began to knock against my ribs. I cannot father a child, Clara. His voice cracked on the last word. I am infertile. It is permanent. The world did not collapse dramatically the way they show in movies. There was no thunder, no rain, just the sound of generators humming somewhere down the street and the distant smell of suya smoke drifting from a roadside spot. Ordinary life continuing around me while mine quietly shattered. I did not cry immediately. I sat there very still, the way you sit when something is too large for your body to immediately process. I loved Daniel. God knows I loved him. We had met at a corporate networking event 3 years before. He was confident and warm, the kind of man who remembered what you said 2 weeks after you said it. He made me feel seen. He made me feel chosen. And in a world that constantly reminded women like me that we were running out of time, being chosen by a man like Daniel felt like safety. But this, I grew up in Lagos. I know what happens to women who cannot produce children. I had watched my own aunt slowly disappear from family gatherings after 8 years of no pregnancy. I had seen how the questions start politely, then grow teeth. Any good news? Are you trying? Maybe you should see a doctor. Maybe something is wrong with you. It always lands on the woman. Always. If I married Daniel and we had no children, nobody would ask about his fertility. Nobody would question him. The shame would be stitched onto me like a second skin, and I would wear it everywhere, to church, to the market, to every family gathering, to his mom's living room, where she already looked at me like a temporary arrangement. I almost left him that evening. I stood up from that chair, walked to the edge of the balcony, and gripped the railing so hard my knuckles ached. I told myself to walk away, that love was not enough to carry what was coming. But then he came and stood beside me, and when I turned, there were tears on his face. Real ones, the kind a proud man only releases when he is truly broken. He whispered, I know I had no right to wait this long. I was afraid of losing you. I am still afraid, but I could not marry you without the truth. Whatever you decide, I will accept it. I looked at him for a long time, and then I made the decision that would cost me everything. I stayed. We agreed together, no one would know. His pride, my protection, our secret. We would figure it out quietly, together, as husband and wife. Maybe adoption, maybe miracles. We were young, we were in love. We believed love was enough of a foundation. We were wrong. But I would not discover just how wrong until years later, when the man standing beside me on that balcony became the same man who would drag my name through the mud in front of everyone we knew.
We had a beautiful wedding. I mean that honestly. It was the kind of day that lives in photographs and memory with equal warmth. 200 guests in Lagos. A church ceremony with a choir that made 3 aunties cry. A reception where my father danced in a way I had never seen him dance before, loose and joyful because his first daughter was finally settled. Daniel looked at me across the dance floor that evening like I was the only solid thing in a spinning world. I believed in us completely. The first year was good. We were building a home, routines, inside jokes, the small private language that married couples develop. He worked in logistics. I was running the catering business I had started before we married, growing it slowly, client by client. The question started at our first Christmas as a married couple. His mom, Fina George, sat across from me at the dining table and smiled with only her mouth. "So, Clara, any good news for us?" I smiled back. "We are still settling in, Mom. Give us time." She nodded, but her eyes said something different. They said, "I am already counting." By our second anniversary, the questions were no longer polite. They came from his aunties, his cousins, our neighbors, women in my church, even my own mother, whose worry I could hear pressing against every phone call. 2 years, my daughter. Have you seen a doctor? Clara, sometimes these things need spiritual attention. There is a pastor of the island. Is everything fine between you and your husband? Because sometimes when a man is not happy at home, it was always about me, what I was doing wrong, what I was failing to produce, what I owed everyone. Daniel would comfort me in private. He would pull me close at night and say, "Don't listen to them. We know our truth. That is enough." For a while, that was enough. But slowly, so slowly I almost did not notice, something began to shift in him. I would catch him watching me sometimes with an expression I could not name, not quite resentment, not quite sadness, something in between, something hollow, like a man staring at a locked door and remembering he threw away the key himself. Fina George started visiting more frequently. I would come home from work and find her sitting in my living room, having let herself in with the spare key Daniel had given her, talking to him in low tones that stopped the moment I walked through the door. One evening, 18 months into our marriage, I overheard her. "Daniel, this girl has not given you a child. How long will you wait? You are my only son. Who will carry this family name? I did not suffer to raise you so that your name dies with you." And Daniel, my Daniel, the one who cried on the balcony and said he would accept whatever I decided, said nothing. He did not defend me. He sat there and said nothing. That silence was the first crack in the wall I had built my hope against. The pressure built over the next year like water behind a dam. I watched my husband change the way you watch a season change, gradually, then all at once. He became quieter at home, more irritable. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped holding my hand in church. And then one night, after Fina George had spent the weekend with us and filled our home with her particular brand of quiet judgment, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table and said the thing that I still hear sometimes in the middle of the night. "Clara, what if we had another option?" I looked up from the food I was picking at. "What do you mean?" He rubbed the back of his neck. He could not look at me directly. What if you were to be with someone else? Just once. Someone we trust. Someone discreet. We would never speak of it again. We would raise the child as ours and no one would ever know. The spoon I was holding dropped against the plate. I stared at him. "Daniel, listen to me. Are you hearing yourself? Clara, I am trying to find a solution. You are asking me to sleep with another man." My voice was very quiet, which somehow made it worse. "You are asking me to do that, and you think that is a solution." He reached across the table. "I know how it sounds, but we are running out of options. His mom is not going to stop. The family is not going to stop. We need an heir. Clara, please, just think about. I stood up from that table, walked into our bedroom, and locked the door. I did not speak to him for 4 days. I refused him 3 more times over the following months. Each time, he came back with a different angle, different words, different emotional pressure. Clara, I am not asking you to love someone else. I am asking you to save our marriage. Do you think I enjoy this? Do you think this is easy for me to ask? I am doing this for us. If you love me, you will find a way to help me. That last one broke something in me because he had flipped it, made my refusal the selfish act, made my discomfort an evidence of insufficient love. And I was tired. 3 years of questions and blame and shame had ground me down in ways I cannot fully describe. I started to believe, at some deep level I am ashamed to admit, that I was the problem, that I owed him this. I want to be clear. I was not weak. I was exhausted. There's a difference. Exhaustion looks like weakness from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like you have been fighting so long you can no longer remember what rest feels like. I finally agreed. His name was Emeka, a distant contact of a friend of Daniel's, someone who lived in Abuja and had no connection to our community. The whole thing was arranged with the cold precision of a business transaction. I felt like I was standing outside my own body, watching a woman I did not fully recognize go through with something she had never imagined. 3 months later, I missed my period. When I showed Daniel the pregnancy test, he held it in his hands and stared at it for a long time. I expected relief. I expected gratitude. I had sacrificed something enormous for this man, my dignity, my sense of self, the private understanding of who I was, and I expected him to recognize that. What I did not expect was what actually happened. He looked up from that test slowly, and the look in his eyes was not gratitude. It was something that looked disturbingly close to disgust. "So it worked," he said flatly, and he put the test down on the counter and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there alone, pregnant with the child we had arranged together, and felt a cold understanding move through my body. He had not truly thought this through. In his desperation to solve the problem of appearances, he had not considered what it would actually feel like to look at his wife every day knowing she was carrying another man's child, even a child he had orchestrated, even a situation he had created. His guilt had cuddled into resentment, and I was the easiest target. The pregnancy that should have been a relief became a source of tension in our home. He stopped touching me. He started coming home late. He answered my questions with monosyllables and looked at my growing belly with an expression that hurt more than anything he ever said out loud. When our daughter was born, we named her Adana at my mother's request. She was small and perfect, and she smelled like warm bread and new life. I held her in that hospital bed and loved her with the kind of love that rearranges your bones, the love that makes you understand why people say they would die for someone. Daniel stood in the corner of the delivery room, away from us both. He held her once, briefly, stiffly, then handed her back. He never called her by her name. He called her the child, or sometimes nothing at all. I watched my daughter grow in a home where her father looked through her like she was made of glass. I watched her reach for him with her small hands and watched him step back. And something in me, whatever had survived the exhaustion, the manipulation, the pregnancy, began to harden into something new. It was not rage. It was quieter than that. It was resolve.
Adana was 2 years old when he brought her home. Her name was Vivian. She was 24 from a town 3 hours away, and Daniel introduced her to his mom before he introduced her to me. I found out through my neighbor, who found out through someone who found out through Fina George's younger sister, who apparently saw no reason to be discreet about it. My husband had a girlfriend. When I confronted him, he did not deny it. "What did you expect, Clara?" he said, calmly, too calmly. "You gave me a child that is not mine. You think I can just move on from that?" I could not speak for a moment. "You asked me to do that," I finally said. "You begged me, Daniel, for months. You wore me down. You made me feel like I was failing you by refusing. And now..." I was desperate, he said. I was not thinking clearly. But what is done is done. That child is not mine and you know it. She is ours. We agreed. I have changed my mind. Those 4 words. I have changed my mind. Like our agreement was a shirt he could take off when it no longer suited him. Like Adana's existence was a policy he could cancel. Like I had not sacrificed everything for a plan he created. I should have known then what was coming. But even with all the pain of those years, I still did not fully believe he was capable of what he did next. It happened at his cousin's wedding in Lagos, a big society event at one of those event halls on the island. Nearly 300 people, both our families, our church members, neighbors, business associates, people who had watched us marry, who had danced at our reception, who had asked me every year when I was going to bring them good news. We were seated at the high table. Adana was with my mother at a table nearby, wearing a yellow dress I had spent 2 weeks selecting because I wanted her to feel beautiful and I wanted everyone to see her beauty. Daniel stood up midway through the celebration. He cleared his throat into the microphone. I thought he was going to make a toast. Some people looked up, smiling, expecting something warm. I want to address something that concerns my family and my name. Something I have been silent about for too long. The crowd quieted. I felt my blood go cold. The child known as Adana, he said, his voice carrying across every table, every corner of that hall, is not my biological daughter. I have done a DNA test. The results are clear. My wife had an affair, and I am not willing to continue carrying this shame in silence. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever experienced. Then it broke into whispers, gasps. A woman across the hall who said Jesus loud enough for several tables to hear. I felt every eye in that hall turn towards me. I felt my mother's gaze like a physical weight. I felt my own face, the heat of humiliation climbing from my neck to my forehead, and I understood with perfect clarity that this was the plan. Not an outburst, not emotion, a plan. He had brought me here, to this public place, with all these witnesses and detonated our secret like a bomb, and he had walked away clean, leaving me buried in the rubble. I did not cry. I want you to know that. I sat very still in that chair while the world rearranged itself around me, and I did not give him the collapse he was waiting for. Inside, I was making a decision. Outside, I said nothing. I picked up my daughter from my mother's arms, held her against my chest so she could not see the faces turning towards us, and I walked out of that hall with my back straight. I would not give him the image of a broken woman. I was just getting started. Everyone expected me to disappear. That is what women in my position were supposed to do. Find a quiet corner, accept the shame, move back to your father's house, start over somewhere no one knows your name. I did move out of the house, not because he threw me out, but because I refused to sleep another night under the same roof as a man who had publicly executed my dignity while our daughter watched in a yellow dress. But I did not disappear. I went to a lawyer named Mrs. Ifeomachuku, a small woman with large glasses and a voice that made courtrooms pay attention. I sat in her office and I told her everything. All of it, from the balcony in Lagos, to the kitchen table, to Emeka, to the pregnancy, to the wedding hall. She listened without interrupting. When she finished, she took off her glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at me. She manipulated you into a situation he then used to destroy you, she said. That is not just a marital dispute. That is coercion, emotional abuse, possible fraud, and we are going to build a case around every single part of it. 3 months after the wedding hall incident, a court summons arrived at Daniel's office. People laughed at first. Of course they did. The community consensus was settled. Clara had cheated. The DNA test confirmed it. What court case could she possibly win? His family sent word through channels that I should drop the matter before I embarrassed myself further. Fina George called my mother and told her to talk some sense into her disgraceful daughter. My mother, the same woman who had spent years asking me about good news, who had sometimes let the community pressure flow through her voice into my ears, called me after that conversation. I expected her to tell me to stop. Instead, she said, "What do you need from me?" I will never forget that. What followed were 8 months that remade me. Mrs. Chukwu was meticulous. She tracked down Emeka, who had no interest in being part of a lie, and confirmed in a formal deposition the exact arrangement that had been made, who had initiated contact, who had coordinated the plan, what Daniel had communicated to him directly. Text messages were recovered. A recorded voice note Daniel had sent Emeka, casual, businesslike, arranging the details of what he was asking his wife to do, was entered into evidence. But the most devastating moment came from something Daniel had never anticipated. He had seen a fertility specialist, not once, multiple times over several years before and during our marriage. Those records existed, that paper trail existed, and when it was presented in court, the entire foundation of his public accusation collapsed. He knew exactly what he was. He hid it deliberately. He pressured his wife into an arrangement to produce an heir. Then, when the child was born, he chose consciously, strategically to weaponize the secret against her. The magistrate presiding over the case was a woman in her 50s who had seen many things in her courtroom. When she read her ruling, her voice was level and clear. Daniel was found liable for emotional abuse, deliberate deception, and malicious public defamation. He was ordered to pay damages. He was required to formally acknowledge his role in the arrangement that led to Adana's conception, and the record was corrected publicly the way the accusation had been made. The same community that had whispered about me read the coverage. Fina George, the woman who had sat in my living room for years counting my childless month like ammunition, did not show her face at the family house for 3 weeks after the ruling. He lost his position at his company 6 months later, not directly related to the case, but the kind of professional unraveling that happens when a man's character becomes publicly legible. Vivian left. He was alone in a way that I think even him surprised, because men like Daniel always believe their charm will outlast their actions, that people will forget, that time smooths everything over. But Adana was growing up. I raised her in a home full of warmth. I grew my catering business into something real, a proper company with staff and regular contracts and a name people in Lagos recognized. I bought my own flat. I found my way back to myself. Slowly, the way you find your way back to a room after a long absence, touching the familiar walls until you remember where everything is. Adana was 12 when she won an essay competition at her school. The essay was about courage. She showed it to me before she submitted it. She had written about a woman who did not fall down when the world pushed her, who gathered herself quietly and then stood up in a courtroom and told the truth, who taught her daughter that dignity does not require anyone's permission. She had not named me, but she had seen everything. At 15, Adana was sharp and focused and building the kind of foundation that produces exceptional people. At 17, she won a scholarship to study abroad. The night before she left, Daniel sent a message through a relative. He wanted to see her. He said he had made mistakes. He said he wanted a chance. He said he was her father. I showed Adana the message and told her she could make her own choice. She read it twice. Then she looked at me with eyes that had watched everything and understood more than I ever intended her to see. A father, she said quietly, is not a biology, it is a behavior. She flew out the next morning. He never got a response.
And that is the thing about men who destroy women publicly to save their own image. They calculate everything except the long game. They see the humiliation and think they have won. They do not see the woman quietly collecting herself in the wreckage. They do not see the lawyer. They do not see the years of rebuilding. They do not see the daughter watching and learning and becoming someone formidable. Daniel did not just lose his reputation that day in the courtroom. He lost his only chance to ever be called a father by the only child he would ever have. And no court case, no apology, no amount of time would give that back. Some things, once broken in the presence of a child, cannot be repaired. He learned that too late. Clara never looked back. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now.